Hey, Forge fans, Anthony Urciuoli here as part of the Forge Audio Network. It seems like it's if it seems like it's been a while since Forge has played a match, it's because it kind of has. April 23rd was the last time. So let me just give you a refresher. Forge at home against FC Edmonton, 3-0 the final, a dominating performance from Forge. Let's just run through the stat line again. It's exactly what the club needed after a slow start to the campaign. 10 shot attempts, 6 of them on target for Forge. Edmonton, 0 in both categories. Possession, almost 69% in favor of Forge. Corners, almost 7-to-1 ratio on corners for the match in favor of Forge. All Forge all the time in that home match against Edmonton, a team who, by the way, can be difficult to score goals against. We've seen it. They picked up points this season, and it's been because they are so difficult to break down and get high-quality chances against. And that's how it was started to look that afternoon at Tim Hortons Field in Hamilton when Forge played Edmonton. Tyron Campbell getting a penalty kick in the 34th minute was the just game changer. It completely changed the game after that. Things opened up. Forge found some space. So that goal in the 34th minute came from Campbell. Tyron Campbell then setting up Tristan Borges for Forge's second goal of the match in the 45th minute. And then after half in the 69th minute, Tyron Campbell putting the exclamation point on the match with his brace, and Forge winning 3-0. Next up was supposed to be Valor. That game canceled last weekend for COVID reasons, and so an impromptu bye week for Forge. How does that change preparations going into this week against York United, which is Friday? It's an away match for Forge. You prepare for one team, which was Valor, and now you have to hit the reset button and prepare for a new team. That's one of the many things I spoke to head coach and technical director of your Forge FC, Bobby Smyrniotis.
Yeah, I think to be honest, we're looking forward to going and playing the game at Valor in Winnipeg. We had a great training week last week, and thought everything was ready. Had a good game plan, but there's certain things obviously we cannot control. So yeah, I just hit the reset button. We played an inter-squad amongst ourselves, and now we're just getting set for York. And they're the challenging opponent down the road. We always know they're very good games, so we're looking forward to it.
Yeah, York kind of represents the parity of the team that the league has found. There was concern, Forge is dominating too much, or maybe Calvary, and it hasn't taken long to see that week after week anyone can beat anybody. York has had an impressive win over Calvary themselves. Have you seen the parity really kind of show through now in this league?
Yeah, I think the one thing that we've seen, and I've talked about from the beginning, is that we'll see results like we've seen over these first few weeks. I think it's a normal thing. A lot of teams have had some changeover, teams coming in with the same identities, different things. So I think it's been common, if you look over the last few years of the league, that we see the results go in different ways in what I'd call the first 8 games of the season. And I think that that trend will probably continue. For us, we want to make sure our trend continues with 3 points, and we keep on moving up the ladder.
Are there specific reasons that the parity's really kind of shown through? Is it just that the teams know each other well?
Yeah, I think to be honest, I think it's either teams knowing each other well or teams getting to know themselves well. One thing we see is a lot of changeover in rosters from year to year. We've been able to keep a consistent team, but we've had quite a bit of changeover as well this year. So I think it takes some time. It doesn't matter how you go about your preseason and what your friendly matches are. It's this first part of the year when you have that working on the tactics and integrating everyone. I think it's normal to see what we've seen over these first few weeks.
Is the club getting healthier at this stage?
Yeah, everyone is looking good. We're 90% of the way there, which is very good at this point of the year. And that's another thing we've seen across the league. There's been different injuries amongst players and so on. It could be a longer period of time off in the off season. For us, a very short off season. So different factors always play into that. But the team is looking good. The team is healthy, and we're just looking forward to Friday night.
All right, I mentioned and I brought up parity to Coach Bobby. Let's stick with that for a moment, and let's bring in Oliver Platt, our CPL analyst. He works for One Soccer, and he joins the Forge Audio Network now. I was thinking about this the other day with this league. You look at Forge and the championships. The first and the second, and then the finals appearance, the third year, and I think from the outside looking in, it would look like there's a lack of parity in the league. But when you really break the league down week to week, I mean, even the biggest upsets don't seem all that surprising. I mean, especially early in the season, this is a league where it really feels like anyone can beat anyone on a given week.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely early in the season, you still see teams maybe figuring it out a little bit, and that does create a certain amount of parity in itself. But I think even beyond that, just teams have improved this year. I think you see teams that maybe weren't particularly relevant, particularly in the first 2 years. Whether it was Atletico Ottawa obviously not existing and then being an expansion team at very short notice. Now they look very competitive, or Valor struggled at times during the first couple of years, but I think they're a really competitive team now. Edmonton has surprised a lot of people with the restrictions they had, the way that they've been able to compete so far. So I definitely think it's a league that's improved a lot. And I think we talked about this last time as well, just about the having a normal season being kind of not completely out of COVID, but in a more normal reality, and the way that's allowed teams to build their roster in a more straightforward way, I think has helped as well. So yeah, definitely the most parity we've seen in the league, I think, although Forge have certainly had to work hard for their previous championships, that being said.
Yeah, and I think this is always a concern when you start a league from scratch, which is essentially what the Canadian Premier League is. And I talked to Andy Petrillo last week, and we had a conversation about in the early days. That was one of the concerns about the league: is can the league, um, can it be a strong league if there isn't enough parity? At least, after the first, okay, maybe year one, year two, but then the parity really needs to start. It needs to look like a competitive league, essentially.
Mm.
And it feels like it hasn't taken the long. It feels like we kind of hit on something. York United, who Forge is playing this weekend, is an example where there are times when they've struggled this season, and then they have that really impressive 2-0 win over Calvary. So the parity seems to have hit maybe sooner than people expected.
Yeah, I think so. I think probably the biggest question you have when you're starting a league is, do we have enough players, right? Do we have players of the required quality? And that for me has been the biggest success of this league. Period. Is that not only do we have the depth of quality in terms of Canadian players that are showing that they can be professionals, but most of the stars of this league, of course, there's been some great international players, but most of the best players in this league have been young Canadian players, and I think that's been a massive success for this league, and hopefully something that bodes well going forwards as the league continues to expand, and obviously the talent maybe gets diluted among more clubs. So yeah, that's definitely something that I think in any league you're kind of thinking about the domestic talent. Is there going to be enough? Is this quality of play going to be good enough to really interest people and engage people? And I think that's been right at the bottom of the list of problems for the CPL and things that need to improve in the early years. The players have done fantastically well, and it's clear there's talent all over the league.
Yeah, the only, I guess, if we're nitpicking here, I think maybe people thought York and Forge would maybe be a bigger rivalry than it
Yeah.
has been. Geographically, it's still there, but competitively, I don't know that it's quite earned, or at least hit the expectations that some people had in the early going.
Yeah, that's fair. I think with York, it's been on and off the pitch. They've been trying to figure out their identity, and I think it's taken a little bit longer than with Forge, where Bobby Smyrniotis and Costa Smyrniotis as well were very, very clear about what they wanted to be about. Right, they have a background of developing talent, to a level that compares to anyone in this country, with obviously their history with Sigma. But then they also made it clear, and I think the club made it clear from Bob Young on down, that they wanted to win championships and compete as well, and not just be a place where young players get a chance, but you don't really win many games. So they've combined those two things very well, and I think that's something that York is still figuring out a bit. Clearly, there's a desire there to develop young players and to potentially see players go on to bigger leagues, but balancing that with also being one of the top teams in the league and competing for championships, that's a really difficult thing to do, and it's taking some time there. I think they're on the right track. I think this is, I look at this roster this year, and I think it's the best they've had, and they've got a fresh voice in there in Martin Nash as well. So I think things are looking good for them, but you're certainly right that Forge have maybe just found the ingredients of again combining development with winning a bit quicker than York have been able to.
Yeah, maybe talk about the combining development with winning. So the development, of course, Coach Bobby Smyrniotis, Forge head coach, technical director. he has that Sigma kind of feeder system there that helps. And, these players have played together for a long time. They're all familiar with each other. It wasn't really a team from scratch. A lot of these players
No.
had experience playing with each other, with these coaches. So, I mean, is that something that's growing in the league? Cavalry has kind of their system in place. Are teams just trying to kind of figure out how they can facilitate that developmental side of their program?
I think so, yeah. I think it differs all around the league, right? Just in terms of where you are in the country and what's realistic for you. It's going to be difficult, much more difficult for a club like Halifax or a club like Valor to really rely on a local pool of players in the same way that teams in the GTA can, or Pacific being near Vancouver can, when there's such a much bigger body of young players to draw upon, right? So you have to be creative, and you have to think about it depending on your situation. So with Halifax, you see they've dipped quite a lot into Quebec and the PLSQ and players coming out of that region, because obviously it's in close proximity to them. They've looked at youth sports players, college players quite a lot, and tried to find different ways of doing it, because they don't have, compared to Forge in York, that massive pool of players that's there in Toronto and the surrounding areas to draw upon. So I think it differs all across the country. I don't think there's one model that's going to work for everyone in terms of how you develop young talent and bring it into the first team. But there's a few different avenues you can go down, and I definitely think clubs are starting to figure out, what's going to work for them and be the best pathway for them.
I wonder, has Canada found, certain nations kind of have a trademark style of the game? Italy was always known for that kind of structured defensive style. Spain, more of that attacking style. Has Canada found that identity, or are we still kind of figuring out, what is Canada's game? What is Canadian soccer?
I think to an extent, I would say, I think like in 2022, I think it's probably less relevant than it used to be. When you watch Italy, Germany, Spain, Netherlands nowadays, you might not see a whole lot of difference between all four of them. Certainly not as much as we've seen in the past, where like you said, there's been kind of more clearly defined styles, and that's just a result of the way soccer is now, right? Coaches go to different countries, players go to different countries, and there's a much more of a mix. That being said, I think you can definitely see that pure athleticism and speed is definitely when you look at the men's national team is a big part of it. We have players, and the story of how Canada was able to go to the World Cup really was about a team that could turn defense into attack in the blink of an eye, right? And so in some of their most vulnerable moments, be at their most dangerous. As the Davies goal against Panama is a classic example of that, where they're on the back foot, they're in their own half, and suddenly they've scored. And so I think that's probably at the very top level of the men's national team, being where it's gone. But I think there's a lot of coaches in the CPL as well who want to play really good technical soccer, want to maybe slow the game down a little bit more at times, and control the ball, control the fields. You see that with Forge. You've started to see it more with Pacific over the past couple of years. Cavalry, always a front foot team. So I have thought, over the first 3 seasons, that the league has been better coached, I think, on that level, on a kind of a technical and tactical level, than you would probably expect a league this young to be.
Yeah, and we know how, especially from coaches, a lot of these leagues, it can be a copycat thing. With one thing works for one club, and it kind of spreads. Yeah. Has that happened in the CPL? Forge, for example, have you seen maybe other teams pick up on some of those things that Bobby's been doing and incorporate into their game?
A little bit, yeah. I think to a certain extent, you've seen certainly teams have tried to be good with the ball and tried to control games where they can, but I do think there's differences in it as well. Pacific, I think, is a very different team in a lot of ways to Forge, even though the end result of trying to score goals, trying to be creative is the same. Pacific's a bit more direct, fast paced. They'll try and press you really high. Forge, I think, is a bit more methodical, and they want to get into their shape and build in that kind of way, in a more patient way. I think Cavalry have probably moved a bit more towards Forge, and maybe that's a kind of inevitable consequence of the playoff results, that they feel they need to be a bit more in that style rather than kind of the high octane, high pace style they were in the first season. They've become a bit more controlled and a bit more methodical. So you can definitely see elements of it. But I do think that when you're talking about who have been the top teams in the league, you can see some pretty clear distinctions between Forge, Cavalry, and Pacific at the same time.
Yeah, and Coach Bobby talks a lot about the first 8 games of a season where teams are still trying to maybe figure things out. They don't have quite the training camp as other clubs do, so things are a little more rushed, and you're kind of figuring things out. The first few games are almost like, I don't want to call them preseason games because they do matter, but you know what I'm saying. So what have you? We're not even halfway through that kind of 8-match mark. At least for Forge, what have you seen in these first few games with Forge and what they're trying to do and what they're trying to find in this season?
I think it's broadly similar to last season in terms of the way they're playing and the way they try and control games and dominate the opponent with the ball. I think probably the thing that stood out to me the most so far this season for Forge is Tyron Campbell. I think he's added a really different element to what they can do just because he's so versatile. You can play him as a centre forward, you can play him as a winger, you can play him in a front 2 or as a single striker. He can basically do whatever job you need him to do in the front line. And I think he's been really impressive, and he's been one who's just fit into the way Forge play, again, with that versatility, with the ability to take up really good positions and be really smart when he doesn't have the ball. He's fit Forge like a glove, right? And I think everyone thought that Tyron Campbell would be a success at Forge with how good a player he's been in this league, but I think he's probably even exceeded just how well and how quickly he's fit into that team. So that's probably the one player that I think has been, not that the other new signings haven't done well. I think there's been some good performances from a lot of them, but he's the one who's really caught my eye as someone who could push the team onto another level, I think, this year.
Yeah, what is it about Campbell that's different than, say, Welshman, who's with the club this year, or even Mo Babuli, who's no longer with the club? What's different about Campbell, and how does he fit in so well with what Forge is trying to do?
I think it's what he does when he doesn't have the ball. There's a lot of attacking players who obviously catch your eye when they have the ball because they're really creative or they're dangerous in the box, and I think Campbell is both of those things. But more so than a lot of other players, he's really intelligent in his movement. And like the Cavalry game was a great example of where Bobby, I think, spotted something in how he could exploit Cavalry's backline, maybe the back 3. And the way Campbell, if you watch the first 25 minutes or so of that game, Campbell was just constantly dragging Dan Klomp out of position. And it was a real problem for Cavalry. They had to make some tactical changes, which they did to give them credit and got them back into the game. But the way Campbell was just able to move and take up really smart positions and, help other players with his movement by creating space for others. He's done that all season, I think, at a really high level. And that's something that is going to make everyone around him better. So, again, I just think he's really fit the way Bobby likes to play.
Yes, and you predicted, I can't remember the exact word you used in your tweet, but after the signings of Hoja Rapport and Campbell, there was a word, I can't remember it now, but it was a big deal, essentially, is what you were trying to say. And already the Campbell signing is making a huge difference. So, Oliver, as always, thanks so much for doing this, and we look forward to chatting again.
Yeah, thank you. Anytime.
All right, always enjoy talking soccer with Oliver, and I always enjoy when you join us. So thank you for that, and keep it locked. We have a full preview coming up shortly with Forge taking on York, and the full breakdown is coming up. So stay tuned wherever you get your Forge content, whether it be through podcasts, through YouTube, through the Forge website, through social media. So many different avenues for you to get it. Keep it locked because there's a lot more coming on the Forge Audio Network.
We are the Forge, the mighty